Hi guys, welcome to a new video by tutorialspedia.com. This video is about TIBCO BW and EMS interview questions. The interview questions that I will be talking about in this video are for both experienced as well as beginners. So going forward, let's talk about the interview questions. I will be talking one by one on different questions, and then also the scenarios where this type of question might be asked and what are the possible answers to each and every question. So the first question in the list is that what are the common scenarios where you will be going to use Java code in your BW project? As we all know that in TIBCO BW we have a Java palette with different palette activities which can be used in order to use Java code in our solution. But this question normally arises because we all know that TIBCO itself provides a lot of palette activities which can be used to fulfill different needs that come across in our project. Still, having all those type of activities, why we often need to have this type of Java code in our solution? So the answer to this question is that there can be scenarios where some of the functionality is not off the shelf available in some TIBCO BW palettes, and we have to write our custom code for that. For example, if we have to do some type of photo editing, we don't have photo editing type of feature available in TIBCO BW off the shelf. So in that kind of situation, if we want to use Swing or AWT libraries of the Java, we will have to use custom code. This is one example. Another example can be that if we want to have some custom event source, because if we want to use Java event source, which is a process starter activity that is based on the custom Java code. So let's suppose that there is some source from which we have to get the events and then trigger our process. For that we have to write the Java code. Another example can be that if we want to have a unique key, if we use some custom Java code, we can create a unique key using that. So another situation which you can explain while answering to this type of question is that let's suppose you have a legacy solution that you are converting or you are translating into BW project. So there can be scenarios, or there can be some complex situations where you have your code already written in Java, and if you compare the effort required to convert or translate it into your TIBCO solution might be very complex or might be very huge. So in that type of situation, if you think that you can reuse your existing Java code by making it compatible to your TIBCO BW solution, you can simply reuse those jars or those Java classes with just making it serializable. So those type of situations you can answer by taking some of the examples like this and explaining that why you need still having the Java code in your solution, despite the fact that we do have a lot of plenty of palette activities available. Another situation can be that for many of the situations, TIBCO provides us the adapters and plugins which we can use. For example, if we have to deal with the LDAP, and if we have to connect with LDAP and do some interaction with the LDAP, we can use LDAP a plugin provided by TIBCO. But let's suppose your organization doesn't have the license available and you are not in a position to purchase this type of LDAP plugin. So in that type of situation, a workaround can be just to use the Java code and embed your Java code in your project, and then you can use it to connect to your LDAP server. So these are the type of example scenarios which you can explain while answering to this type of question. Okay, so the next question is, which is the question number 2, how we can handle CSV data in TIBCO BW process. Most of you already know that CSV is comma separated values. So CSV is CSV is a very popular type of data that we often come across while working in TIBCO BW based projects. So if you have to deal with that CSV data, the question is that how you are going to deal with this in TIBCO BW process. So the answer is that in TIBCO BW we have two options to deal with the CSV data. Either we can use the file adapter, or we can simply go for the parse data activities using the data format, and then pass the data and use it in subsequent activities and do whatever business logic we want to do in your solution. And when you have to explain the answer, it's better that whenever you give multiple options like this using the parse data activities or the file adapter, best approach will be that you also explain the pros and cons of using each and every type of alternate. For example, here you can say that if you have the large chunk of data, and the data, if you think that the data that you are going to deal, which is in the form of the CSV, is going to be huge, it is more preferable to use the file adapter instead of using the parse data, because whenever you will be using the parse data activities, all the processing that you're doing will be within the same engine, and it will be consuming a lot of memory. But if you're using a separate file adapter is tweaked and used and need to be used for this type of situation, so the file adapter services are going to be more efficient compared to this. But on the other end, if you think of the licensing costs, file adapter whenever you are going to buy, you have to buy it separately. But if you use parse data activities, those are inbuilt and part of the BW itself, and these are the designer palette activities. So there are often pros and cons using one or the other alternate. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Question number 3 is that if you want to get only some specific type of messages from a queue or a topic, how we can do that? Okay, so before answering the question, let me go to the background of this question, that why this type of situation might arise. Consider a scenario where you have a dedicated queue for all the orders. Now the orders are coming from multiple sources. For example, some orders are coming from a web source. People are placing the orders through the website. Some orders are coming through a mobile app, and some orders are coming through the representatives of the organization. So this is just an example that orders are coming from multiple streams and landing to the same EMS queue. Let's suppose you have a process, you have a requirement that you only want to filter out and utilize and use only those orders which are coming from the mobile app. So how you can do that? So that type of question is the question here being asked. So the answer is that in TIBCO EMS, we have the message selector feature available, and using the message selector based on the header properties, we can only pick and utilize only those EMS queue messages which are of our interest, and we can just keep the other messages pending in the same queue. Alright, so the next question is that what are the different ways of developing SOAP web service in TIBCO? So web services development is one of the most important phenomena, and whenever you are going to have an interview in any organization where you are going to have a development role, I'm quite sure that you will be asked some question related to the web services, because web services are being developed and being used in almost every organization. So what are the ways of developing the web services? The question asked here. So there are two ways. One is that you build first. The second is you contract first. That is top-down and bottom-up approach. What does this mean? In the build first approach, you first build the processes and then expose those processes in the form of a web service. And the contract first approach is that first you develop the WSDL. You specify all the operations, all the interfaces, all the input and output WSDL messages. And once that is done, then you just go into the development of the internal business logic processes. So these are the two ways. For developing the web service, in both ways you have the WSDL as well as the SOAP palette available in your service palette, as well as the SOAP palette available in your TIBCO design. So if the interviewer asks you in detail, you can further go down and explain how you can develop the web service, how you can use different palette activities like SOAP event source to expose a process as a web service operation, and also the service palette activity, and then specifying different operations and associated processes within that service. Alright, moving on to the next question. Question number 5 is that what are the different security options available for TIBCO services? Security is fundamental to any organization, and having services and the solutions exposed in a secure manner is the primary need of any organization. So security is always taken as a very serious matter for any organization. Specifically talking about the integration solutions. So when the question like this is asked, what are the security features or security options available when you are developing solution in TIBCO? So the answer is that you can use SSL based security feature, that is secured certificates you can use, and when you are using certificates, your communication, whether it's the JMS based communication or HTTP based communication, will be on the secure socket, and you will be using HTTPS or you will be using JMS with a secured layer. So this is one option available. The second option is that you can have basic username and password based HTTP authentication, and whenever you are using the basic security authentication mechanism, then the client request will be authenticated based on the user password and of course on the role based as well. So this is the second option. The third option that you can expand your answer while answering to this type of question if you see that the question is of importance, and for example if you are in a banking domain and you are going to have an interview in banking domain, you will be already aware that they will be weighing this type of question very much, because in banking, in those type of situations, in those type of organization, security related questions and how you answer this type of question are taken very seriously. So the third answer can be that you will have the firewalls further associated, and when you have the firewall, then you will have another layer of security for the external world. So how you answer this type of question, how you add further details and deep understanding of your concept into the answer will further encourage your interviewer to have a better impression of you. Okay, so moving on to the next question. Question number 6 is that how we can run dynamically created JDBC queries in TIBCO. So the answer to this question is that in TIBCO BW we have in TIBCO Designer we have a JDBC palette where we have plenty of activities. For example, we have JDBC update activity, JDBC query activity, and similarly we have another activity known as SQL Direct. So the answer is that we can use SQL Direct activity for dynamically created JDBC queries, and then using that SQL Direct we can have our queries executed in the database based on the dynamically created query which is given as an input to this activity. Okay, so the question number 7 is that what should be the criteria of specifying variables as global. It's an important thing from the design perspective, that whenever you are developing your solution, you have options of keeping your variables as process variables, or you can have the variables as global variables. So what is the deciding factor that a particular variable should be specified as global or it should be a local variable, and then what are the drawbacks and what are the pros and cons? So the answer is that any variable which you think is going to be changed during the migration from one environment to another, for example from the development to the staging and UAT and the production environment, that should be kept as global. Reason, because any variable which is specified as global, that can be changed at runtime, at the deployment time, by just changing the global variable in TIBCO administrator. But if you specify a variable as local variable, but that variable is embedded within a process, if you have to change it, you will have to recreate the ER and redeploy it. So that's an additional effort, and no one is going to think of this type of solution when it comes to having this global when it comes to having the variable in your process. So this is the answer to this question. And secondly, what are the pros and cons? That I have already explained, that if you are using too much global variable unnecessarily, that is just kind of a useless thing. For example, if you think one particular type of variable is never going to be changed, you don't need to keep it as a global variable. But if you think some variables are going to be changed, but you don't keep it as a global variable and put it as a local variable, then in future you might be in a problematic situation whenever there is a need arises to make it changed. Let's suppose an example. Take an example here that you have a JDBC call procedure activity in your process, which is calling some database stored procedure. And the timeout value for this stored procedure you specified not in a global variable, rather you just hard coded it within your activity. Let's suppose you kept it as 30 seconds. Later, let's suppose you face problems and you get the timeout exceptions from this JDBC activity, and our business says that since there are a lot of complexities associated with the stored procedure being called from the database, so the timeout value should be changed to 1 minute instead of 30 seconds. You go into the design in your global variable and see that it's not available there because you didn't put it as a global variable. Then you are in a problem. You cannot afford now to just recreate your ER, take the time in creating it, then deploying, moving it into one environment, second environment, and moving it into production. So this type of situation will create problems in your organization, and your project will be considered as a bad project. So this type of criteria should be taken into your consideration while you are developing the projects in your BW solution. Okay, so moving on to the next question, question number 8, how we can share the messages among multiple destinations in EMS based communication. Whenever I say destination, it means a queue or a topic, because collectively the name destination is used. So let's suppose this question can be rephrased in different ways by the interviewer. For example, they can say that you are sending a client is sending a message to a Q.A, but the same message is to be utilized and should be sent to another Q and another topic. Let's suppose Q.B and the topic.A. So how you can achieve that? You cannot say that client will have to send it to the multiple destinations itself, because the client is, let's suppose, someone external to your organization or external to your team, and they are not going to bother about this, that how it's going to be reflected in multiple destinations, because that is something internal to your TIBCO solutions. So in that type of situation, how you can deal with this? So whenever this type of questions are, the answer is that in EMS we have the bridging option available. So we can bridge between multiple queues and topics, or between topics and topics, that is between multiple destinations. And whenever queues and topics, queues with some other queues are bridged, then in that type of situation, whenever a message is sent to a queue, it is copied or it is sent to all the bridged destinations, and then you can utilize it there as well. And another question that can be associated or related to this is that, let's suppose you have a EMS server. The messages that are sent to one EMS server, you have another EMS server set up in your organization. You want those messages to be sent to that EMS server as well. So in that type of situation, how you can do this? So whenever you have multiple EMS servers, you cannot bridge. Bridging is between the destination within the same EMS server. So the answer is that whenever you have multiple EMS servers and you want communication to be enabled among the destination within those EMS servers, you can do the routing. So whenever you do the routing, the messages sent to one EMS server are routed to the destinations in the routed EMS server as well, based on the destinations similarities in names. Alright, so moving on to the question number 9, explain how ADB adapter works. So this is a question which can be asked not only specific to ADB adapter, sometimes they might ask other adapters as well, but ADB adapter is one of the most common adapters being used, so I just picked this question. So how ADB adapter works? So ADB adapters basically work based on the service mechanism. It has publications, subscription, request response invocation services. So those services are used either to which are either going to be publishing services or the subscription services. Whenever it's a publishing service, it's going to take the data from the database and publish it to the TIBCO bus. That is, it's going to make it available to the TIBCO process. Whenever we configure a subscription service, it's going to subscribe the data from the TIBCO process and make it available to the database. So it is working vice versa. And how these services work, basically we have some publishing tables. We have a source table available in our database. Then we have a publishing table where the data is published and based on a trigger which is automatically created on the source table, and then from the publishing table data is picked up by the subscription service, and then it is being sent to the TIBCO process. And within TIBCO process we will have adapter subscriber as a process starter, which will be picking up the data. So this is for the case of a publishing service. Whenever we talk about a subscription service which picks up the data from a TIBCO process and then makes it available to the database, then the data is sent into the towards the database and being reflected in the database tables. So additionally, you can talk about whenever you have to answer this type of question, you can talk more in detail regarding taking different palette activities into consideration and answering based on the scenarios. Okay, so the next question, which is question number 10, is that in a scenario where we want to share some data among multiple engines after setting it once, for example at startup time, what kind of palette resource we can use? Okay, so the answer to this question is that we have a shared variable, shared resource palette activity available, which can be used to share the data among multiple engines. If you want to share it among multiple engines, we have a multi-engine checkbox that we will have to set, and only then we can share it among multiple engines. Okay. And for some of the questions, I'm not going into much details because I'm just going to give you an idea of the question, and then if you want further details about that particular pallet activity, and if the answer is regarding a pallet, then of course if you read more about the documentation of that pallet, you can get a better answer and more deeper understanding of that pallet activity. So the next question that comes in our way is that question, how we can add machines to a TIBCO domain. So in TIBCO domain, whenever we deploy any solution, that is we deploy any ER, we specify that which particular machine it's going to be deployed. So the machines must be added into the domain, only then those machines are made available for the ER deployment. So the answer that how we can add the machine is simple, that we can use the domain utility. Domain utility has the option of adding the machines to the existing domains. We can of course have different other features also available in the domain utility, which might be asked in the interview. For example, if you want to create a domain, that is also available, and that's also possible using the TIBCO domain utility. There are some other options like adding some softwares into a domain and adding the EMS and other plugins, and those are the features available in the domain utility. So domain utility related to domain utility, specific to domain utility, they might ask you other questions as well, that where we can find the domain utility. It's a part of the TRA. That's the answer to that question. So you should have a fair understanding how domain utility can be used and what are the features available within the domain utility. Alright, moving to question number 12, how we can ensure high availability of a BW engine in TIBCO deployments. High availability is very important for organizations for any solutions being deployed in production. High availability means that let's suppose because of any internal or external known or unknown reasons, one of the machine goes down. We cannot afford our services to be down for a larger amount of time. So in that type of situation, we always think of the ways that our solutions should be deployed in high availability mode with the downtime as minimum as possible, and literally it should be zero. So how it can be achieved? It can be achieved by having our solutions deployed in the fault tolerant mode. So answering to this question, you can further go into the detail. What is fault tolerance? That is, we have a primary secondary pair of the machines where we deploy our solution, and then once we have the primary machine down for any reason, if solution is deployed in fault tolerant mode, then all the requests, subsequent requests coming into our solution are being processed by our secondary deployment. That becomes the primary at that time, and then whenever the primary machine is up, then we switch back to the primary machine. So that is how we achieve the fault tolerance in our solution. While deploying the solution in a fault tolerant mode, how we specify the machine, how we specify the weightage, those are the things which might also be asked to you while answering this type of question. Because there can be often cross questions based on the answer that you give to a particular question. So you should be having fair understanding of the concepts, and you should talk about a concept only if you are aware of the related concepts of that particular topic. Alright, so next question number 13, explain the key components of a SOAP service. This is a question which is just a generic question regarding a SOAP web service and not specific to TIBCO alone. Of course, SOAP is standard protocol, and the SOAP web services are not limited to TIBCO only. In fact, in any programming language or in any tool, whenever you're developing a SOAP web service, the basic components, basic building blocks of a web service remain same. So asking this type of question, they will be testing your knowledge regarding the web services, and mostly this type of question will be asked to a beginner or for an intermediate type of resource. So answer is that a SOAP web service basically is represented in the form of a web service descriptive language WSDL, which is an XML, which is having all the details of a web service, and a WSDL basically contains a port type, and a port type is similar to what we say in a programming language is a class. That is, it consists of multiple operations. Each operation has the SOAP messages associated with it for its request, response, and fault. That is, we have 3 types of SOAP messages based on which our WSDL operations input and output schemas are specified. And every web service, whenever we have to expose it, it's exposed based on the concrete WSDL, and a concrete WSDL is abstract WSDL plus the transport details. So this is how you can explain different body constructs of a SOAP web service. Alright, next question number 14 is that what is the purpose of a transaction group? In TIBCO BW designer processes, we have the grouping feature available. So whenever we have to group, there are different type of groups that we can create. So interviewer might ask you different questions regarding the grouping. For example, what is iteration group, what is a while, what is a if group, what is a while error, repeat an error until true group. So those are the different type of groups. But here in this question specifically, I have taken into consideration a transaction group. So the answer that what is the purpose of transaction group is that a transaction group basically combines a set of activities which you think should be completed in the form of a single transaction, and if any of those group activities fails, all the previously transacted activities should also be rolled back. For example, if you have multiple JDBC activities which are part of the same order processing or same request processing, and if you think that if any of those activities is failed, the previous activities, if made any changes to the database, should also be rolled back, and commit should be done only once all of those activities have been processed successfully. Then you create a transaction group, JDBC transaction group, for this type of collective activities. So as I was explaining that for some other type of groups also you might be asked questions. So you should have a fair understanding of different type of groups available and how we can achieve multiple iterations, and how to deal with these type of iteration, how to add what are the best practices of having some sleep other wait time between the multiple iterations of these group activities. So in some of the other videos for sure I will go in detail about different iteration groups. Okay, so the next question number 15 is that what is the difference between render XML and parse XML? So render XML and parse XML are the XML activities available in XML palette. These are very commonly used XML activities, so you should have an understanding where you should be using render XML and parse XML activities. So the answer to this question is that parse XML activity is used whenever you want to take some string as an input, which is of course a XML based string, and then based on a particular XST, that is based on a schema, you want to parse it, and the output of this activity will be a parsed XML, validated XML. So this activity will be used, an example scenario is that you are taking some data through some HTTP source as an input, and then you want to validate and parse it, and only then you want to use it in subsequent activities. You will be using the parse XML activity in the input editor of this parse XML, and the output editor, I'm not sure whether it's input editor or output editor, I will have to check, but in some of the editor you will have to specify the XST, and then based on XST then this XML will be validated. Okay, so the render XML activity is opposite to the parse XML activity. That is, the render XML activity basically takes an XML and input and outputs the data in the form of a string. So this type of activity will be used whenever you want to send some user and the XML data in the form of a string. For example, if you are populating the data, if you are sending the data in the form of a ASCII content to a HTTP response, you will be rendering the XML before sending it. So this render XML activity, if you can use, and subsequent, another option is that you can just use a render XML function as well within your XPath in order to render an XML into a string format. Alright, next question number 16, if we don't have TIBCO administrator GUI access, how we can perform ER deployment? Okay, so this question is primarily asked in organization where focus is on scripted deployments rather than administrator-based deployments. So the answer to this question is that we have app manage utility available in our TRA that provides us features and different commands which we can use to have a scripted deployments. So using the app manage commands, we can deploy, undeploy, and also do different type of other administrative actions. You can of course go in further details if they are asking about the app manage utility and some of the options available. There are some other tools also available based on app manage. For example, you can use Ant-based deployments, Ant-based scripted deployments. Also, there are some third-party tools available like TIBCO, which we can use in order to do the scripted deployment. Okay, so the next question number 17 is that what are the best practices for logging in TIBCO BW based processes? Logging is something which is a primary concern when we are developing complex solutions, because logs are the only way we can dig down into the solutions to have any type of investigation or any type of tracking of all the processing that has been taken place using through the TIBCO BW processes. So the best practices of the logging, of course the best practices we can have some generic understanding, but in different organizations there can be some specialized or specific needs as well. So the answer to this question must be keeping in mind what kind of organization you are going to deal with. For example, if you are going to work in a banking organization, then you should take into consideration how critical the transactions for them are. So the logs that you create should have the at most as much possible in data as you can have, but the data security is also a concern. So the secure data should never be in the log. So coming to the best practices for logging, the minimum logging that you should have is the input and output of your processes. That is, whatever you are, whenever the input means that whenever your process is started, the start time as well as some of the payload that the process received should be logged, keeping in mind the security considerations as well. And also the output, that is the end activity of your process, whenever your process has completed should be logged, as well as whatever the output payload that your process has created. And also in the subsequent activities, if you are calling some sub processes, those details should also be logged properly, and your logging should have a proper correlation among the logs and the exceptions, so that whenever there is some transaction which is failing, you should be able to track between the logs and the exceptions. And whenever you are logging in your process, the information that is being logged should be easily traceable among the multiple processes, among the multiple engines, and among the multiple services. Okay, so the next question is question number 18. How will you handle exception scenarios in TIBCO? So handling the exception is a very important concept, because without handling the exceptions, your code is not going to be considered as a suitable code. So in TIBCO BW processes, exceptions can be handled using by catching the exceptions and then taking the appropriate actions. For catching the exception, you have the catch activity, and in the catch activity you have option whether you want to catch all the exception in a single catch activity and then take the action, or you want to catch some specific type of exception and take the appropriate specific actions for that type of exception. So best approach is that you catch the activities together if the actions are going to be generic. For example, if you are just going to have a notification with a stack trace and the exception message detail, but if you have to take some specific action for a type of exception, then you'll have to handle it separately. Then coming to the sub-processes, the best approach is that if you have a lot of sub-processes involved in your solution, then sub-processes should be just rethrowing the exception using the rethrow activity to the main process, and the exception handling mechanism should be developed in your main process. Going to the next question, question number 19. If your solution involves processing or translating huge bulk of XML data, or it can be any type of data, what is the key consideration or the worrying factor that must be taken care of? Okay, so if you are developing a solution and if you are going to deploy a solution which you think that is going to deal with the payloads of very large XML blocks, how you are going to deal with it, because you know that your solution is having a lot of transformation, internal translations of the XML data, and then parsing those data. Then the important consideration is the memory. The answer to this question is that a memory is the key consideration in this situation, because whenever the transformation or translations are involved in such a huge way, then it's important that you have allocated proper heap size to your solution in your administrator. The heap size should be sufficient enough, and the memory should be properly considered, how much memory is utilized to deal with this type of issue. Also, other process configuration should be taken into consideration. For example, how many instances of the process should be in the memory, what should be the flow limit, what should be the next jobs, and these are all the parameters that you should properly configure in this type of solution. Okay, so the last question of this video is question number 20, which is that can an external party or system interact with a TIBCO web service if we share just the abstract WSDL? Okay, this is some type of a question which should be for the beginners, because experienced resources might not be asked this type of questions, as they already have a fair understanding of a difference between an abstract WSDL and a concrete WSDL. But for beginners, it might be something they might be asked, just to gauge that how much they understand this. So the answer to this question is that with an abstract WSDL, an external system or external application or external party cannot consume a web service, because abstract WSDL does not have the transport details or a communication detail. So endpoints, if not available in a WSDL, it's not a consumable WSDL. So in order to get it consumed by the external system, you should have a concrete WSDL, and a concrete WSDL has all the transport details and have the proper endpoints with the host as well as the IP address as well as the port details. Okay, so this concludes our video. I hope you liked the video. If you have any questions, you can just post in the comment box, and I'll try my best to answer your question. Thank you very much.